So we're here with our friend and colleague Nick Walker to talk about a number of issues pertaining to autism. And Nick, could you just briefly describe who you are and bit of your background?
So my name is Nick Walker, and I'm an autistic author, speaker, activist, and scholar. I teach at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco and Sophia University in Palo Alto, and I am a martial artist. I'm an Aikido teacher. I've taught the martial art of Aikido for about 35 years or more now.
Nick, as an autistic adult, what advice would you give the parents of young autistic children?
Don't panic. There is a panic narrative about autism in our culture. Autism is a terrible, devastating tragedy that will ruin your child's life and your life, and just don't listen to that. Give your child more space. Worry less. Children need to find their own way into things through creative play, and that's a slower process, and a process with autistic kids, it can be a slower process because autistic children have a more complicated sensory and cognitive experience to manage, more complicated and more intense compared to non-autistic children. And so there's more for them to sort through in the world. There's more for them to sort through in their experience as they're small children or older children learning to navigate the world. They need the space to find their way into that because it's going to be different depending on their particular sensory and cognitive needs. It's going to look very different. Trust the weirdness. Trust the weirdness. Children have a natural impulse to explore and develop in the ways that their brains need. So, of course, guide your child the way you would guide any non-autistic child. Guide your child to learn the life skills they need, but also be patient with how the process unfolds and recognize that the process is going to look different, and don't panic. One thing autistic children are known for often is you give them toys to play with, and instead of taking their dolls or whatever and playing with them like they're alive, they will take their toys and line them all up, in size order or in order by color, and then they'll put them in their mouths, and they'll spin the wheels of little toy cars and all of the they'll do all these things that don't look like standard, imaginative play. And there's a narrative of panic around this. Is interpreted as being a bad sign, as being a sign of some deficit in the child. They're playing wrong. Oh no, my child is playing wrong. We have to take these toys away because the child's just lining them up. We have to make the child play with them right. There's no such thing as playing wrong unless someone's getting seriously injured in the play. There's no such thing as playing wrong. That's the point of creative play, of free play. There's no wrong. It is how the child develops and explores. What is happening is because the child's cognitive and sensory experience is so complex, they need to sort through everything and explore all the component pieces of something before they start integrating it into a coherent whole. And so you give a child enough time to line up all their toys and line things up in size order and smell them and taste them and all of this stuff. And eventually they start putting the pieces together and something emerges that is creative and imaginative. Once they understand all the components, they start putting them together in very creative, exciting ways, and that may look like standard imaginative children's play, or it may be building things in different ways. But you have to give it the space to develop. And what happens is people look at the kids who are lining up their toys and tasting them and not playing with dolls like they're alive, and they say autistic children, they lack imagination. Autistic people lack imagination, and they lack this ability to do creative play. Of course, every autistic adult I've met is in some way or another a highly creative and imaginative individual. If you take away the toys or stop them or try to force them to play in a particular way, they'll never get a chance to develop their own unique creativity. If you give it space and don't panic and just observe and let them play the way they're going to play, eventually these amazing understandings and forms of creativity will emerge from that. But it's necessary to be spacious with that, to do exactly the opposite of what behavioral therapists do, where they try to make kids play in a certain way. Same thing with body movement, which is just creative play again. The way your child moves, obviously you want them to learn to do things. If you want them to learn to do basic manual tasks that children need to do and such, but the way, let them find their own way into it. The way they move is part of how their brains work. So movement for non-autistic children also, it's the case. They need to find their own ways to move their body and play, and they develop their little brains by moving around and exploring the world. Autistic kids do too, and they also move as a way of regulating their sensory experience and their cognitive experience. The movement of the whole body, of the hands, rocking movements, all of this are ways of regulating sensory experience. They're intimately connected to how the child is thinking and processing. If you try to force your child to move like a non-autistic person, or you suppress movements because they're disturbing to you because they're not normal enough, you're suppressing your child's ability to develop their best potentials, and you're suppressing their ability to regulate their sensory experience. They're trying to develop it. If a child is falling apart and having meltdowns and screaming fits and such, it's because they're overwhelmed. Something in their environment is overwhelming them. There's sensory overload, or just too much information to manage, or generally a sign of mental exhaustion or overload. Now, eventually, given the space, as kids grow up, they can learn to regulate themselves. They can learn to regulate their experience so they don't overload. And it's good to help kids with that. It's good to help kids encourage them to use their own strategies, which may include distinctively autistic ways of moving their body, like rocking and flapping their hands, and exploring textures of surfaces, and so whatever it is, touching things, whatever it is they need to do to regulate themselves, let them do it. And in terms of what sort of special therapies or lessons an autistic child might learn, prioritize self-regulation in teach them meditation or yoga. I mean, little kids love yoga poses and stuff, or love, like, okay, let's breathe slowly together. Little kids will do that. Teach them the basic self-regulation. Any program of therapy or education that won't let your child rock back and forth and flap their hands and touch things and look away from people and all, rescue your kid from that stuff, protect your kid from being subjected to that sort of thing, because what those so-called therapies are doing is taking away a child's capacity to do what they need to do to develop and to regulate their experience and to learn to manage the world. So there's this vicious circle, this cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. Your child is falling apart and melting down and screaming, and parents panic and think, oh, there's something terribly wrong with my child. And then they put the child in, you know, some program of behaviorist therapy, ABA or something like that, or some other sort of so-called treatment program, where and in that program they try to make the child look more outwardly normal, which means they try to make the child make eye contact and keep their hands still and not rock back and forth and not wander away from the table during a lesson. But all of those things the child is doing are ways the child is trying to learn to regulate themselves so they don't fall apart. And so if you take away those things, the child becomes more and more traumatized, and they're more and more likely to fall apart. And then, of course, there's this vicious circle. The child falls apart more, and the parents say, oh, the child must need more therapy, more treatment. What they actually need is less treatment. They need you to fire the behavioral therapist and give them some space to relax. Give the child some space to relax and to move the way that they need to move. I would say also, listen to autistic adults. Their experience may be different from your child's in some way. They may not be exactly like your child, but chances are you'll be able to find autistic adults who are out there writing or talking on camera or talking about their experiences and about what you can do for your child. You'll find someone who's got enough in common with your child that you can learn from them. And there's this myth that gets spread, which is that any autistic adult who is out there speaking and writing and having a career as a speaker or writer or scholar or artist or whatever, they are so advanced. They must always have been highly capable or so advanced and capable. They're nothing like your child, you know, who can't speak. We are like your children, and even if your child doesn't speak, needs help with everyday tasks, they might change. That might change over the course of a lifetime, but if it doesn't, that doesn't necessarily keep them from having a high quality of life, or being creatively fulfilled or doing great things in their life of one sort or another, and just being happy. Sometimes you will you look at someone's, you know, writing in a book or writing on the internet, and they seem very articulate to you. You don't know what their life is like. A lot of their extraordinary autistic activists and writers like Amy Sequenzia, for instance, who are non-speaking in their daily lives. They communicate entirely through typing, and when they were children, their parents were told, your child is low functioning, your child is extremely low intelligence, and they'll never be able to communicate, and they'll never have high quality of life. And these people, you know, Amy Sequenzia, for instance, you know, a friend of mine, non-speaking, needs help with everyday tasks, but very articulate writer, great poet, wonderful person, and she's happy. She has friends, she thinks of herself as having a very high quality of life, which, after all, is what any good parent wants for their kids, right? Is that happiness and creative fulfillment. So people look at autistic adults like myself who are, you know, a graduate degree and career and marriage and child and all that. And yeah, parents want that sort of thing for their children. I do not think if they'd seen me as a child that they would have guessed. You know, I was not a child where when I was 5 years old, people were saying, oh yeah, he's got a great future as a speaker, and oh yeah, he'll give me grandchildren, and he'll go far. People were not saying that about me when I was 5 or when I was 8. So It's ridiculous to look at any autistic child and any autistic adult and say, this child could never end up being anything like this adult, because you have no idea. What else can I say to parents? I can say, prioritize communication over speech. There are other ways to communicate besides speaking. And again, some of the most eloquent autistic activists and advocates and scholars and authors and poets are non-speaking. They don't speak, they communicate by typing, and that's fine. They're perfectly eloquent, and they have contributed important things to the dialogue around autism, or just contributed great poetry to the culture. So prioritize not insisting that your child communicate in spoken words. Even if they can speak, that might not be their best way of communicating. That might not be the best way for them to establish real communication about their needs. So focus as much as possible on giving your child a good way to communicate, and don't be attached to that being about verbal speaking, about oral speech. There have been a lot of these situations in which autistic people who are non-speaking, who have been dismissed as unintelligent, have eventually learned to communicate through typing. Every time, one of the first things that they have to say to people is, I understood everything this whole time. People thought I was unintelligent, but I've been completely aware this whole time, understanding the things that people around me said, even if I couldn't make myself understood yet. So assume that there's some level of comprehension there, and whatever your child's challenges are, if they have interests in things that are complex, let them follow those interests. It's very possible that a child may never learn to speak and may never look normal. They may look by non-autistic standards extremely weird, and maybe the experts call them names like low functioning or whatever. But it's possible that the child, if they follow the things they're interested in, music or poetry or learning about some particular thing, that they can end up with a very sophisticated understanding of the particular things they're interested in. So let them follow their interests, and you may be happily surprised by the long-term developmental results of that.